Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We are here with the Open Money Initiative, and I will let them introduce themselves. There's a lot of really great content that they'll be sharing.
Thanks, Sinju. Hi, everyone. So my name is Alejandro Machado, and I'm a founder of the Open Money Initiative. I'm here with my friends Boaz and Cheyenne. The Open Money Initiative is a network for sound research about closed economies and how technology can help people living in those closed economies. We believe that access to an open and privacy-preserving financial system is a basic human right. And before we begin, I want to thank our contributors for their support over the years. Zuko Wilcox, the Electric Coin Company, Local Bitcoins, IDO, and the foundations Zcash Foundation, Tesla's Foundation, Interchain Foundation, and Stellar Development Foundation, and the Human Rights Foundation, which Alex Gladstein is a good friend of ours, and loved seeing his keynote presentation earlier today. I think sets the stage pretty well because we care a lot about human rights, and we care a lot about how people can be helped using technology. And I also want to give a shout out to Matt Alberg, who did some recent research with us on how Bitcoin is used for remittances in Venezuela and produced some more research on Argentina. So check out his Medium if you haven't yet. And Lee Quen, finally, for connecting us with Cheyenne here. So this is going to be kind of a conversation among friends. We are going to take some questions at the end. We're going to talk about, so each of us has expertise in a different country. I am Venezuelan. I'm from Venezuela, born and raised, and go occasionally. Boaz has a lot of experience in Cuba. He has run businesses in Cuba, and Cheyenne is from Iran. And so I'm going to let them both introduce themselves first, and then we're going to be responding to some questions that we kind of pre-formulated around, like the questions that the audience might have about how people are using Bitcoin in Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran, and in general, how people are living, in these closed societies where money is restricted. So I'm gonna let Boaz and then Cheyenne introduce themselves.
Okay, my name is Boaz. I ran a couple of websites which help people in Cuba do business online. For reasons which we will discuss in a bit, doing business online with the rest of the world is very, very complicated if you live in Cuba. And my business helped people actually manage to do this. And one of the tools that we use is Bitcoin. And over the last couple of months, I've been working together with the Open Money Initiative in writing up some of the experiences and some of the ways in which people manage to get money in and out of Cuba.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Cheyenne. I'm currently based in Canada, so not in Iran. And funny fact that this website is not accessible from Iran without a VPN, which is an irony there. So I started looking into Bitcoin in early 2012. And as someone that grew up in Iran, I saw the value of how much people can actually use this. And with some friends that we basically found each other through Reddit, Bitcoin, we co-founded some websites like Coin Iran, and later on a podcast called Shir Ya Khat, which translates to head or tails. So we started those mainly to remove the language barrier of these material. There was so much educational material, and we started to translate them to Farsi. The community grew really fast. Sometimes because of the ICO craze, but then still there are so many people that got involved in the technology. So I've been working with them. It's non-profit educational. And right now I'm working at blockchain security engineer as my kind of auditor with Consensus. This is outside what I'm going to talk about here. So these are all my personal experiences and opinions. And also I'm doing my PhD on the side at Concordia University. So that's all. Glad to be here.
Cool, very cool. Thanks for introducing yourselves, and thanks the audience for engaging. I've been seeing some of the questions that you've been asking on the chat, and we'll get to those. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about how we're going to try to set the context, because I think it's helpful that people that know nothing or very little about Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, Lebanon in the future, places that it's hard to imagine for people living especially in the first world where there's a lot of fans of DeFi and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general. I think it's good to set the context. And since we have lived in these places and we know people in these places, we can kind of introduce what it's like, right? So Cheyenne, I would want to start with you first and ask you, how do people live in Iran? You know, what does a day in the life of someone that lives in Iran look like, and especially when it comes to using money?
Yeah, so Shorty talked about this. There were like really interesting things that came up that, so like in Iran, economy is working as like people can buy things, sell things. They can even do it online, but the main difference is it's a closed digital economy as well. So if you have a credit card, MasterCard, doesn't matter where it was issued, you cannot use it in Iran. Like that's different in even Cuba and Venezuela, as we're gonna get there. But so economy is closed, both in the financial wise and even shipment. So you can, even if you have a credit card outside Iran, you cannot buy anything off Amazon, even if you don't see Iran in the options to be delivering things there, which is like outside the topic that we're going to talk about here. But like people can use there's a really good national digital currency, digital economy. People can buy and sell within like national cards. That goes from like the economy wise. There is some other facts that like in the last like 5 years, basically the value of their money is like 1/3. Like people were starting to get used to the fact that like they would wake up one morning and the price of eggs are like doubled, which is like we've seen in Venezuela a lot with hyperinflation. In Iran, they didn't call it hyperinflation. They weren't really covering it over the news, but it happened. And basically in the last 10 years, it used to be 1,002 months was $1, and now it's around $11,000 is $1. So it's tenfold. And look, those situation does not help like the people that are living. One other thing, as like we know, most of the people are here are familiar with technical aspects. If you want to like install a Linux like package, you might not be able to do that without a VPN, because one of the resources might be hosted on SourceForge or Google codes, and those are sanctioned in Iran's traffic. So you could not install a Linux package because one of the dependencies are using the services that are sanctioned in Iran for some reason. Like I don't know that many government officials that play with Linux around. So that's an interesting thing for day-to-day jobs, and like people that are working with technology would feel for the sanctions. I want to like let us continue the conversation for other things, and we touch on these later.
Sure. Yeah, lots of interesting things. What about Cuba, Boaz? How does a Cuban use money?
So Cuba is basically since the 1960s has been a Soviet-style, state-planned economy, and how people use money is a bit different to Iran. First of all, you've got a dual currency system, which means that people are used to carrying around two currencies at the same time. They're two national currencies for reasons which are quite complex, but basically the Cuban government issues two different currencies and people basically use both of them interchangeably. And now over the last year, we've seen some steps towards dollarization. So now people are carrying three currencies again. So and they're all basically the US dollar and two Cuban pesos, which are both pegged to the US dollar. So it's a bit of a mess in terms of using money on a day-to-day.
So not only one fiat, but two fiat and potentially a third one now.
Yeah, it's a three fiat economy. And I think, the state planned economy, what does that mean? It leads to scarcity. You have to stand in line to wait for things very often. It's not a very efficient economy. Private businesses are very heavily regulated. Some small private businesses are allowed, but overall, it's not really possible to run a for-profit farm, for example, which leads to food scarcity, etc., etc. And the difference to Iran, so Cheyenne was saying that Iran is a closed digital economy. Cuba is not only a closed digital economy, but up until recently had very little digital economy. There was almost none of it there because the internet is quite new in Cuba. It's only been around really, it's been around in one way or another for a few years now, but it's only become, democratized and available to everyone on their phone fairly recently at accessible prices. And only now are you seeing the very beginnings of the e-commerce cropping up in Cuba. And this leads to very interesting results. So on one hand, you see the sort of web shops that the Soviet Union would have designed if the internet was around back then. And on the other hand, you see a lot of private initiatives of people trying to set up businesses trying to do commerce online. And they're having trouble, often because of the U.S. sanctions, which have been in place since the 1960s, and because of all sorts of layers of the tech stack that are not available to Cubans. So if you want to buy hosting, it's very hard to do if you don't have anyone with a bank account or credit card from on the outside. If you want to, and even if you manage to buy the hosting, there's some providers which like Google cloud providers just blocks Cuba from accessing any site, and often you don't know what layer of the tech stack the block is happening, and you might be blocked without even knowing that you're blocked. So, for example, CoinCap, which is Shapeshift's site of where you see the price of different cryptocurrencies, used to be blocked in Cuba without them even knowing. So, in brief, it's a very closed, very emerging, very new digital economy. And the traditional economy is this old school state-planned economy, and people are running around with almost 3 different types of currencies in their wallet, trying to get scarce goods from shops.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about Venezuela now. Venezuela and Cuba have a lot of similarities because the way that the Venezuela economy and the Venezuelan politics have been heavily inspired in Cuba. And so Venezuela used to be a wealthy country not very long ago. It used to be one of the most prosperous economies in Latin America. And we have one of the highest percentages of banked people in Latin America. We have 74% of adults have a bank account in Venezuela. And so there is the history is kind of long and kind of complicated, but basically Venezuela has established kind of capital controls since 2003, so people cannot move their money freely in and out of the country. And we'll get to that in a kind of a follow-up question now. But the way that people use money in Venezuela today, because of this these restrictions, and because the US dollar has always been seen as a store of value and as a good currency, is right now people are mostly transacting in US dollars when they want to handle cash. And they're mostly transacting in electronic bolivars because, as I said, most people do have access to bank accounts. So they either do transfers from an account to another account, or they can swipe debit cards. Most people do have debit cards. And that's how they pay for things. So there's kind of 2 currencies, if you will, that people use every day: the US dollar, and this only in cash, unless you're lucky enough to be banked also in another country. So there's a small bubble in Caracas and the main cities where you can have access to Zelle, which is a payment method that they use in the US, or it's actually I think more used in Venezuela than in the US itself. But if you have a bank account in the US, which a lot of Venezuelans do, not a lot in the sense of the majority of people, but a significant minority of Venezuelans do have access to it. And if I have a bank account in the US and you have a bank in the US, I can pay you even though we're both the same. We're both located in Venezuela. So that is something that very few people have access to, electronic dollar transactions. But a lot of people do have access to the cash dollar, because cash, anyone can have it. It's a better instrument, and it's been spreading around Venezuela, especially since last year, when hyperinflation had hit and there was a massive blackout and payment options were scarce, and so people started just using the US dollar. There was fear of using the US dollar in the past because the government was always very much against it. They wanted to control the currency so that they control the people. And but now they kind of accepted the fact that a free market-ish economy is better for prosperity, and people are less upset at the government because there are more options, right? So the government kind of accepted it, and now that there's people in general every day use two currencies, the Bolivar and the US dollar. And so I think I jumped a little bit ahead of time on the question of why, like why are these economies closed, and why is the context like this? And so maybe I can just like finish talking about like the specific case in Venezuela, and then I'll take it to Cuba and then Iran. In Venezuela, the government has established capital controls since 2003, and so people cannot move their money in and out of the country. They required a special government permission to do it, and now the government is saying no to everyone. And so the way that people move money in and out is through black markets. So if you have a guy who trades dollars and you hit him up on WhatsApp, that's the way you can exchange money. And if you, for example, want to use Bitcoin, or you can use local Bitcoins to get online and to trade your bolivars for an asset that you can hold electronically, and that's why it's kind of useful, right? Recently, U.S. sanctions have become more stringent on Venezuela, especially on some government officials. So these are targeted sanctions that don't allow certain individuals from transacting with the U.S. Financial system, and that creates some overcompliance practices from U.S. banks that just want to shut off all Venezuelan business because of just a few people. I think it's less than 100 people or so that are actually barred from transacting with U.S. entities. So it's becoming a problem. It's not a huge problem yet in Venezuela, but I'm sure that is different for other countries. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Boaz?
Yeah, I think on the sanction spectrum, I think Cuba is somewhere in between Venezuela and Iran, maybe. Cuba has the longest standing U.S. sanctions program, and I think when we talk about closed economies, Cuba's a closed economy for two reasons. On one hand, you have the government doing this central planning and not allowing private businesses except for very limited sectors. But on the other hand, you have the U.S. government, which, in theory promotes entrepreneurship in Cuba and promotes private businesses, et cetera, et cetera. But in practice, the sanctions regulations, as you said, there's overcompliance, and it's impossible for anyone that is a Cuban resident to get any sort of very little possibility for them to get, any sort of tech product, they need to buy anything online, et cetera, et cetera. So Bitcoin there is a pretty useful tool because even though you're not doing anything illegal, even according to US law, in practice it's impossible because the banks and the tech companies, they just don't want to deal with the regulatory hassle, with the compliance issues. So they just block out everything that has to do with Cuba. So what does that mean? So as I said, you cannot buy hosting, but you cannot even transfer in from Europe to Cuba. It's very difficult to make a bank transfer, not because Cuba is not sanctioned by the EU. According to the EU, Cuba is fine to do business with, etc., but because most of the world's financial infrastructure works through the United States, it's kind of tough to find a bank that's willing to make a bank transfer to Cuba. In fact, the few ones that actually do are, for example, in the Netherlands, I think, I may be wrong, but I think Rabobank was nationalized in 2008 financial crisis. And because they're partly owned by the government, they're one of the only ones that are, willing to actually make the transfer from Europe to Cuba. So, because it's so hard to do this, and because there's more and more sanctions on the remittance side as well, Bitcoin has become a way for people to send money to Cuba. And, one of the earlier speakers was from local Bitcoins. Well, local Bitcoins is also banned in Cuba. As a Cuban, you cannot access local Bitcoins. So what you do is, effectively, there's a bunch of Telegram groups, and there's a couple of Cuban OTC desks, basically. And I've spoken to people that want to send money to their parents back home, and they just find someone to transfer their parents the money. and they give them Bitcoin, and that's how the way it works. And by the way, there's a 10 to almost 20% premium now on the price of Bitcoin in Cuba. So if you find a way of spending a lot of money, or if you're going on holiday to Cuba, that's the way to go forward.
Yeah, tough to go on a holiday during a pandemic, but
Very
if you
tough
find
to
a
go on
way, yes. All right.
Yeah, just to say like what is closed economy means in Iran's context. It was like pretty good that Iran would fall, like Cuba would fall between Iran and Venezuela in that sense, because like as he said that there is still some way that to use your credit card in Cuba. Like so, a lot of hotels have like ATMs. If you have a European bank credit card, like there is this condition, but still you can get cash. But that's not the case in Iran. That like you cannot use credit card or anything, even if you log into your PayPal with VPN and other things to bypass all the filters, your account will be suspended because like you logged in from Iran. And that's a big thing. Like I know people were using the PayPal before for some online like use cases, and they don't anymore because like their account got suspended and they don't have a way to get it out. But also like Iran has this one main is the like planned economy and capital control to like make sure the money within Iran is not going out. Although once in a while, some government officials leaves the country with like $100,000 billion or something, which is like kind of leaking the money out. But also like sanctions are really hardcore in Iran, and there's like not only US related ones, there are like so many other sanctions that United States pushes to other countries. And it has been like affecting like medical equipment, like medicine, and every level that affects people's lives. And there was like some while ago that diapers were like rare in the country, and that was as a result of some sanctions. And the reason one of those happens is like it's really hard within Iran to come up with these links to outside for importing. And when one of these sanctions happens, some of the like remittance channels or money transfer channels get closed down. And meanwhile, till the businesses can find new ways, those agreements are like not valid anymore. So they have to look for new suppliers. There's a lot of like logistics there that just gets broken because of the money routes. And yeah, mainly that. And also the other main factor is Iran is using this economical model called Islamic finance, which is there is no concept of debt or credit in there, which changes a lot of like the fundamental of how economy works compared to somewhere like United States. Yeah, like I think we can. I know Boaz started talking about like Bitcoin use cases in the country, but I feel like we can do a more in depth of them.
I think so. That this is, I think, a good segue because I've been seeing some of the questions in the audience, just been monitoring if there's anything like directly relevant to what we're discussing. Yeah. And there's a few people saying, I'm not a Bitcoin fanboy. Why do you talk so much about Bitcoin and not like mention other cryptocurrencies or other technologies? Why? What do you say? Like, what do you say to that? Like, what is the reason why we are discussing Bitcoin more than perhaps EOS or Ethereum or anything else?
So the main reason is how close it is to actual fiat money, like how easy it is to convert them. Like I know a lot of like online exchanges or like even people willing to accept Bitcoin since like 5-6 years ago in Iran. They started to accept like Ethereum too because of the use cases, especially after 2017, that there were so many use cases for the ICOs, and people wanted Ethereum to do different things. And I know Tether also became a thing, mainly because of they wanted to hold US dollars, and that was the only way they could in a digital form. But the main reason is how close it is to be able to like cash it out. If they have EOS, at the end they have to convert that to Bitcoin to be able to convert that to the fiat money that they use for daily use. And other than that, I think that's the main reason.
No, that makes sense. I can say the same about Venezuela. I'm wondering about the Cuban case because Cuba is a new digital economy. So Bitcoin did not have a chance to set hold on Cuba, because Bitcoin has 10 years of history, but Cuba has 2 years of internet history, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think that is? Like, why is Bitcoin also like being used more in Cuba in your experience?
Well, I think it's the same reason. There's more liquidity. It's easier to convert to cash than anything else. maybe, I mean, Cuba is interesting because, as you said, it's a new digital economy. So people are quite willing to try out all sorts of cryptocurrencies, and maybe that's a small segue into our little scam segment. But basically, people are very willing to try new things. But if you're trying to move serious amounts of money in and out of the country, you need somewhere to land it outside of Cuba, and Bitcoin is where it is. I mean, Bitcoin's the means of exchange that it's easiest to move across borders. It's easy to buy in Europe or the US and sell in Cuba without fear of having your account frozen, etc., etc. It's just a matter of convenience and network effects, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So you would say it doesn't have a lot to do with how decentralized Bitcoin is, or maybe it does, but it's a secondary. It's like a secondary effect, right?
I think it's a secondary effect. I think the reason that there's a lot of liquidity and the reason you can do a lot of the things that you can do is precisely because it's decentralized. I mean, people in Cuba have been known to open a PayPal account and use that to do business online for convenience, etc., etc. So there's enough security that you'd be willing to sacrifice for convenience and ease of use. The problem with that is that if you get your account suspended, you lose all the money there, right? So if you're dealing like $50 to get paid for a tour or something, then opening a PayPal account using your email is fine. If you want to move in $100,000 US, maybe you don't want to take that risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, to that point, actually, one of the things about decentralization is one of the things that was beautiful for Bitcoin early on that I was like reading about it all the time was the fact that no one can tell me that you're banned or you cannot use us because of the geopolitical reasons. And that was the dream for me, like when I was actually growing up, that like, I'm a geek, doesn't matter if I'm like Iranian or not, like I want to use this thing. And decentralization, that's where it comes in there. And Iranians, like they've seen this a lot, that like PayPal accounts got suspended and banned and they lost money. And later on, the whole concept of like not your keys, not your coins, they learned through like hard way of like Bittrex. A lot of people use the exchanges as also their wallets, and Bittrex like banned Iranians. Like a lot of other exchanges, the same thing happened. Even local Bitcoins banned Iranians, and they had to like jump through hoops to try to get their money out, and some couldn't ever do that because they had to do some kind of KYC. And now they know more than ever that like if they have the local wallet and they hold their keys, no one can just take the money away from them. And that's a big difference of like any other money form or source of like store of value that we've seen before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we should briefly touch on the fact that it's not only Bitcoin and internet, like there are other things that are important for Bitcoin or for, financial technologies to be able to take hold in a country. And I mean, if you can't have communications, if you can't reach, somewhere over the internet, then you absolutely cannot transfer Bitcoin, right? So I think there's also, we're building on a stack of technologies that are important. So being able to use VPNs is important. And I know that you have some stories around VPNs in Iran, Cheyenne. In Venezuela, for example, you needed to use a VPN to get inside the country. Like if you're outside the country and you want to transfer funds locally between two bank accounts, you currently need to use a VPN or have someone in Venezuela do it for you, because the banks are required to ban transactions that are or that communications that are coming from outside the country, so that people don't trade bolivars, because they've realized that people are trading bolivars outside the country, and they're connecting the system, like Venezuela's system, with other systems outside, be it Bitcoin or be it bank accounts in the US or Panama or whatever. A lot of people are doing this, and before the government was kind of a little bit more pro free trade, because they've become that way recently. They wanted to crack down heavily on these things, and I'm sure that some of that happens in Iran, be it because of sanctions or because of the domestic regulations that the government doesn't want the currency devaluating. Are there other like layers of the infrastructure besides Bitcoin that is very difficult to attack Bitcoin? what are the vulnerable points of the technologies that people use to get around open money or closed economies?
Yeah, I can answer that, even if Boaz wants to talk about like Cuba. Yeah, please feel free to add that after. So like, it's funny that like VPNs is something that from a 4-year-old or someone that can talk till like grandparents know about VPNs, and they have it VPN on their phones in Iran. And I don't think that's the same in a lot of other places. And because like starting from Telegram is filtered from Iran, Twitter is filtered from inside, but also outside. Facebook similarly, like it has both ways. There's like 2 layers of filtering within Iran happening for internet. So they use VPNs. A lot of people use Chinese anti-filter apps, which are not secure at all, and it's not suggested. But sometimes, like when they have to, they just use them. But a lot of others use like Bitcoin to pay for VPN servers outside Iran. And it's one of the main use cases for like spending Bitcoin, because there are not that many ways of like reasons to spend there. And the one other thing that kind of made me go through a whole existential challenge a while ago was when Iran shut down internet. And that was the moment that I was thinking, and like basically a bit loud on Twitter, that like we all thinking that we're working on like censorship resistance technologies, but what happens when someone unplugs internet? And like one thing is like, so even 10 years ago, that was almost impossible, even in Iran, because of the infrastructure, banking system. But they have arrived to a point that they shut down internet without anything faulty within the banking system, and like inside Iran, like the websites are hosted inside Iran. So there are so many there, and it was, as a technology advancement, that's fascinating that they were able to do this. But then what does that mean for Bitcoin? And one of my questions back then was like, let's say, because I know Russia has been talking about the similar moves to like be able to like have their own internet and disconnect from outside due to some cyber attacks. But what happens to like blockchains if, let's say, we have a lot of miners in Russia and Russia unplugs? Then we're going to have a fork. So what's going to happen then? Like what happens after they reconnect? These are questions that I don't know if they're clear answers, but that was interesting to like just think about for future, and it's kind of outside this conversation. Yeah, so like a lot of those infrastructures would not help in that sense when we're using crypto, right?
Yeah.
What about Cuba? What about it's nascent infrastructure? You know, like there's it's all very new. So how does that affect?
Yeah. Well, VPNs are absolutely essential. It's happened to me that I've been testing an SPV wallet, simple light wallet over in Cuba, and it just didn't work without a VPN because at some layer of the tech stack, it was blocking the information from leaving because I was in Cuba. I think the key thing here is the internet, and I want to take a moment to talk about how the internet works a bit in Cuba, because I see some questions regarding that. So it used to be the case that you could only get online in public parks. The internet was incredibly slow. It was very restricted, very expensive. That's no longer the case. The internet is still quite expensive, so it's not very available to everyone. But if you've got some money, you can pretty much get online on your phone wherever you are, whenever you want. So that's democratized the entire internet process. So pretty much anyone can get online now, and everyone's on Facebook now. Everyone's on WhatsApp. I think it would be politically very, very difficult for a Cuban government to turn off the internet. I wouldn't say it's impossible, because nothing's impossible. But in the case that should happen, you have to remember that Cuba's about 100-something miles away from Florida, right? I know that there's been some research done on using, I think, short bandwidth radios to broadcast things, and there's that Bitcoin satellite, etc., etc. I don't know to what extent these are solutions, but I agree that the internet and VPN are absolutely essential for these projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I was also seeing some of the questions, and we do have, I think there was like a side topic that we wanted to talk about that's important, because we're talking about how the restrictions hurt everyday people. We want to talk about that, like how do domestic policies and sanctions from outside are affecting the economies of everyday individuals who have nothing to do or little to do with the politics of the country, or like, and we believe that they should have a right to transact over the internet and with other people in their vicinity, with the currency that they choose, and with the people that they choose. It's about allowing kind of that trade and that like essential economic activity, and also in a private manner. Like we haven't talked much about privacy, but I think we should get to it before the end. And so, specifically during this pandemic, there have been efforts at relief, like support, right? And before the pandemic, there was a case of earthquakes and like natural disasters. So there was money that was going to go to regular people in Iran and in Cuba, and in the case of Venezuela, this has happened as well. Like a lot of people have created GoFundMe accounts, and like I have personally helped hospitals get money, raise money from outside, and the university where I graduated is also raising money from alumni outside so that they can keep the lights on because the state is not helping. So how does that what has happened there? Like if you're trying to like raise money for a just cause, and you have a team on the ground that is going to deliver the help, how is that how is the closed money situation affecting it, and what can be done? Is Bitcoin an option to overcome like the blockades or the things that are going on? Maybe you can start, Cheyenne.
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of sad to see how some of the like policies, or even basically like monetary policies, are affecting humanitarian aspects of like our lives. That like, so like one of the best examples I can think of was like 2 years ago there was an earthquake in west of Iran, and people on Facebook gathered like this page through crowdfundme or some other like platform, and they gathered around $1 million to help
Wow.
earthquake survivors and like victims. And $1 million, especially in Iran's economy, is a lot. They can build the whole city with it and help all of those people for food for a while to get them back on their feet. But the problem that happened was basically Facebook didn't say anything till the crowdfunding was done. And then when they wanted to send the money, they blocked the account. They banned even the founder of that crowdfunding campaign. And it took them, I think, almost like 6 months to refund that money back to the donors. And what happened was basically that money never arrived in Iran and to those like victims. And even the donors that wanted to find some other way, they had their money locked in Facebook without any explanation, any even ideas of like what's going to happen. So it prevented them from like trying to donate some other facts, other methods. But like the rest,
and to be clear, the organizers of this campaign had nothing to do with the government of Iran, right?
No, not at all. Like it was actually
so it was everyday people trying to help.
Yeah, it was a partnership with Red Cross, and later after Red Cross announced on their website that they cannot accept donations for Iran at this point, which is like a sad thing. Like when Red Cross cannot accept donation to help like earthquake victims,
of course,
like something's wrong there.
Yeah. I mean, because it's one thing to not allow corrupt officials of a bad government, and this is like a thing that can happen in Iran, can happen in like corrupt officials can be anywhere in Russia and even in the United States. You can have people that are bad actors that the financial system might want to stop from transacting, or like if a society wants to punish a bad actor, like we have things like prison, we have things like courts, and we have things like like there is a system to deal with bad actors. But the problem is when you do away with the presumption of innocence in the case of the financial institutions, right? And you treat everyone in Iran as a criminal because of something that either the government is doing or someone else is doing, and that is very concerning.
Yeah, just one thing I want to add, like there was after a while, like last year, there was these flash floods all over East Asia happening. And there was this other system ran that I think was called Iran Rescue Bit, that they accepted Bitcoin and Ethereum to be able to like help people in need. This was like a private, like I know the people that started that, there were like two young people that started this. But the problem was like they raised around $10,000 through Bitcoin, Ethereum, and I think one or two more stable coins. But then they started to have some legal issues within Iran because they were linked to the outside governments for any reason. And because of that fight around it, people stopped helping, and they even stopped that initiative because they didn't know how to declare that, which is like another issue through this, because where is this money coming from? That was the main question. And they were like anonymous donors. It was hard to explain to governments. Yeah, go for it.
There was a very similar story in Cuba a couple of years ago. There was a hurricane, and there was a pretty big GoFundMe campaign to support people that were impacted by this hurricane. And the same thing happened. It got shut down. People never received the money. And more recently now with the pandemic, so the founder of Alibaba, Jack Ma, donated PPE and masks to all the countries of Latin America. And the only country that the masks never made it to was Cuba. Because it's just, I mean, in theory, on paper, it's possible to, like, there's no sanctions against medical equipment, et cetera, but it's just so difficult, and you need so many permits, you need so many, like, just so complicated that in practice, it's just, you just don't do it. And if a Chinese billionaire can't manage to do it, then imagine how much, what the chance of, Cuban private entrepreneurs is. And
or even someone with more ties to Cuba. There are a lot of Cuban Americans that I'm sure will be more than willing to help. Like, you don't need a Chinese billionaire to donate masks when you have many millionaires in the US that are from Cuba that would be very, very willing to help, but they are legally unable to, right?
It's very difficult. I mean, I'm not. To be fair, like, there's plenty of things that the Cuban government does to make things difficult as well.
Absolutely.
But in this particular case, it was the American sanctions that made it impossible to donate masks. And on the other hand, there's another interesting story now with the pandemic. So what the pandemic has done now in Cuba is, it has forced everyone to go online all over the world. But the effect in Cuba has been even stronger because the internet's brand new, and all the things that people have been delaying for years have now, has been pushed online immediately. And there was a fashion store called Clandestina, and back when Obama was doing the whole reopening Cuba sort of thing, Clandestina was one of those companies that was always in every single article about how Cuban private entrepreneurs are getting ahead in the new government, and it's a sign of reopening, et cetera. So Clandestina opened up a website somehow. I don't know what platform they used, but they got shut down because of OFAC, right? Because of US sanctions. And I'd like to point out that these are quite liberal Havana private entrepreneurs that are, if I had to guess, they're probably not the strongest supporters of state-banned economies and censorship. And they released this viral video, saying, "Come on, Marco Rubio, like, he's to stop messing with us in the middle of a pandemic." So yeah, effectively, it's just very, very difficult to do things because of the regulations that are in place. Even though on paper the regulations do nothing, in practice it makes things impossible. And I saw this with my business as well. When Donald Trump started doing things, tweeting and speaking, making speeches in Miami, saying, okay, from now on, people can't actually travel to Cuba, et cetera. So the actual legal changes were minimal and didn't actually impact anything. But the perception was so big that effectively volume started to go down.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's a very important point, that we would like to still have options to punish bad actors. We don't want dictatorships. We don't want people that are able to spend their corrupt funds that they stole from a state elsewhere, and that is all fine, and that could be a legitimate reason to want to establish or impose sanctions. But when it ends up hurting the everyday people, you have to rethink if those things are desirable, and that's something that Bitcoin is very, very strong about. Like it gives everyone the access to a financial system that is neutral in many ways. Of course, the early adopters have profited more from it than the later adopters, but still, Bitcoin and perhaps other cryptocurrencies as well are trying to create a world where you have access to money, no matter who you are, no matter where you got it from. And of course, again, like societies need to have some way to perhaps monitor bad actors and bad actions. But the presumption of innocence is a very powerful thing. And if you shouldn't have to prove that you're clean to transact. I think the assumption should be that your money is clean, and you should have the right to do whatever you want with other people. And that is a very powerful thing that we got from the Enlightenment. And in free societies, we believe in that, and we should extend that to people that live under oppressive regimes, but still desire freedom and still have done nothing wrong.
I think that if we're talking about the unintended consequences of sanctions and how they basically cause harm to ordinary people, I think it's only fair if we also discuss the unintended consequences of cryptocurrencies. And one of the interesting things that I've spotted is that Bitcoin gives you freedom, right? Cryptocurrencies give you freedom. So in Cuba, that means freedom to transact online, freedom to buy a plane ticket, freedom to top up your phone from the comfort of your house. But it also gives you the freedom to spend all your money on Ponzi schemes and scams. And that's something that has been a huge thing in Cuba. There's because you have to think about it. This is the internet just came in. People just found out about cryptocurrencies. So this is like 2017 for them. Plus the internet is new. Plus they've been living in a state-planned economy where basically, there's quote unquote no scams. So there's been a huge influx of money into Ponzi schemes and scams. The most popular ones, I think, were one German Florida one called Karabat Bars, and the other one's called Trust Invest. Basically, there's been a lot of money going into these pyramid schemes and frankly scams, and it's been concerning. And part of the reason, I mean, the government in Cuba is actually quite hands off the whole cryptocurrency thing. But a lot of the people in there are worried that eventually there's going to be a crackdown, not because they don't want people to be able to top up their phone online or to do business online using Bitcoin, but precisely because so many people are getting scammed and losing all their money in these schemes. And of course, like just with like OneCoin, I mean, the cryptocurrency theme is just like the little, decoration around the pyramid scheme. But at the end of the day, if that's what people associate with it, it could be very dangerous.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to add to that point that it's really similar to Iran, mainly because like pyramid scams and like gold quest back then, it was a big thing in Iran, mainly because how like Tuman and Iran's currency is just going down. People would try anything, and initially gold quest was like with gold coins, so it was actually some valuable thing, but it ended up being other things. And now we've seen a lot. Like I know the OneCoin, one of the big ones. There's this recent one, DAG coin. There's something called Pi Network. I'm not sure if it's scam or not, but I don't know what the scam is. But it's getting I got a lot of messages from like Iranian friends that like, what is this? I see like everyone talk about this, and we have to like jump in now. It's the next Bitcoin. There's like so many like promises that they don't have any tech behind them. And as you said, like people are like they've seen like so there's a difference. Like I guess a lot of Cubans, they haven't seen Nigerian prince scams. They haven't got love letters from strangers. So these things like are like really new. In Iranians, like most of them, they have seen these, but still like they've seen also Bitcoin and they've seen their own money going down. So they want to try anything to jump in the next wave, right? And it's really sad to see these scams. Like we try, like both on Coin Iran and the Sharia Khat podcast, like we try to like cover them as much as we can, but we cannot like just name all of them, because like by the time they get to our attention that we live outside Iran, it's already late. Like it already has done some damages. But what we try to do is like to teach people how to look into the technologies, how to look into them. But human greed is always there, and people want to like jump in even before knowing more about it. So that's the same case in Iran too, and we've even seen like not national players, but in soccer, some of the players like clothing had the advertisement of some of the scam projects, and that's like shows how much they put money in to market their coins. It was fascinating to see those.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Someone's asking us if we're wearing pants. I think we're all wearing pants. We can stand up to show that we are actually wearing pants.
Yeah.
And freedom has responsibilities. That's another comment that I agree with. And it relates to the Ponzi schemes. In Venezuela also there are Ponzi schemes, and notice that this doesn't have anything to do directly with the concept of cryptocurrency. It could happen with digital currency as well. Like it's just that it's a new medium where people can transact electronically. People are not used to it, and they will have to get used to it. And it's just a matter of the technology becoming socially acceptable and socially, adopted. And so that way, societies are going to get these antibodies. And I got that from you, Boaz. Like they don't have like defenses against these things that are scams, but they will get them. And we will. Like governments can try to educate the population, but there eventually are going to be some cases of scams, and it happens with any new technology. And so we have a little bit less than 10 minutes, so I wanted to get to some of the questions. There's a very popular question that is kind of complicated, but I think we can scratch the surface of this. So Bitcoin crypto requires telecom, internet, or a lot of electricity to mine, both controlled by state entities. How can users avoid leaving footprints that state actors can follow? What do you think the future holds for cutting the telecom and electric system cords? So I can answer like quickly, but it's going to be incomplete. But I just don't think that we need to participate in the Bitcoin ecosystem like with everything we've got. Like if it's dangerous to mine Bitcoin in Venezuela because the state tracks you and knows about you, then you don't need to have a mining machine in Venezuela to do it. And you can still participate in other ways. You can trade Bitcoin, and you can try to use VPNs and try to hide from authorities. That way, if what you feel you're doing is something that is ethically permissible, but not perhaps legally permissible to you. And so that is a way that you can do it. Like I don't think we have an answer for how you can fully engage with the ecosystem. Of course, we should be encouraging people to take sovereignty in their hands and to mine Bitcoin and to participate in the system in all the ways they can. But sometimes, if it's not available, if all you have is a phone that is $40 and like you don't have a computer in your home, that's fine. That you can still get access to Bitcoin. That is something that you should be able to do. So it depends on who you are, what your options are. But yeah, it's difficult to be a full participant. What would you say? What would you guys say?
Well, in my experience, so I come from the perspective of someone that has had to move Bitcoin to Cuba. And my key concern is I don't want my bank accounts frozen because it has happened and it sucks. It's really bad. I have to go to court in the next few months. But it's terrible. And you want to avoid that. So for me, privacy protecting technology is one of the things I'm most interested in. So I've been following developments with non-custodial tumblers, like Wasabi. I've been reading up on join markets. I mean, these are all things that are relatively new technologies. They're not quite there yet, but I think in the long term, it's absolutely essential to have some sort of way of protecting yourself against snooping eyes of companies. And yeah, I mean, in Cuba, some things are very difficult. Like as of right now, it's probably unfeasible to set up your own Bitcoin node and run it, and not to mention mining, because even though mining is strongly, I mean, the electricity is strongly subsidized. At the end of the day, there's the internet's not that cheap. The electricity is not that cheap. There's blackouts every now and then. The coming year economically looks terrible, so there probably will be more blackouts in the future. So there's relatively, I mean, running your own node and mining and stuff is not something I necessarily think is very feasible. Although I wouldn't be surprised if someone's already running their own node in Cuba. But just by having a normal SPV wallet on your phone just opens up to a lot of very, very concrete, very practical possibilities that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, and that's something beautiful that we can do. Like we, as people that are able to live in societies that are more open and tolerant of these things, by having our own nodes and by running our own infrastructure, are helping people that don't have the possibility of doing that. And that's something that we're directly helping in that way if we do it.
Yeah, one thing I want to add about like privacy is like it really depends on the context too, and like you can use a new technology that no one knows about, and by the definition that's private because they don't know how to check. Like I know a few years ago, so like sex workers in Iran have like a lot of issues because a lot of places they have issues, but they're because of religion and other things. The outcomes are really worse, and like they get arrested, they get all the assets, like everything they own, like confiscated, and after a while they are free, but they don't get their money or even assets back. So I know that like they started using Bitcoin as basically the store of value because they knew that if they have a few words written down in a piece of paper in the corner, no one would know that has some value. So they would use that as in order to like save their money, even though they get arrested and come back, they still have that money, which was like a fascinating use case. I've never heard of that before. Also, like privacy, the reason why I'm saying it depends on the context, touching that's the point of like the OFAC list. So I just put it out there. If the listeners want more detail, you can tweet something to my tweet handle. I can send you some links to read. But there are like 2 Bitcoin addresses added to OFAC, specially designated nations or SDN sanctioned list, which are related to an Iranian exchange that used basically bought some Bitcoin from some ransomware groups, but no one really knows because like they linked that ransom group to Iranian actors, but all the online analyses are related to some Russian or unknown actors. It's a really interesting story, but as like it's fascinating to know, a year and a half ago, 2 Bitcoin addresses were added to United States sanctioned list, which is like fascinating as like how Bitcoin advanced till today that is in that list as other nation, like big nation actors.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So I just got a message from the host saying that we should wrap this up soon. I think we can quickly answer to that last question. Like the second most popular question is, what can developers and people that are enthusiasts about this space do for people in countries like ours? What do you say to that, Cheyenne? Let's close it up.
Yeah, so one thing is that to develop open source technology so people can actually get into depth of that. One thing we're trying to do is like translate all the materials. We translate ethereum.org. We translate before like mastering Bitcoin. We are working on mastering Ethereum right now to like those people that there. But one way like try like help us fund ourselves. Like we've been basically paying out of pocket for the last 5 years, and it's getting difficult with all like crypto winter and everything. And we tried reaching out Ethereum Foundation and some others to get some funds, but no one's incentivized to fund us because it's not, I guess it's the same capitalism method. It's not profitable to fund a non-profit project, right? Absolutely. But at the end, like you would end up with a lot more developers because there are so many people that want to do freelance jobs in these countries. They just need the right information, right? So open source projects, well documented, do Gitcoin, like do freelance projects or bounties for translations. Those would help a lot with all these countries.
Amazing.
All right, guys, thanks so much for a really amazing talk. We're going to transition